When we think of the Renaissance, we imagine genius artists like Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, and Raphael. We think of kings, scholars, and inventors reshaping the world. But behind this explosion of art and knowledge, there's another story, one that history often left in the shadows, the story of women. The Renaissance, which began in Italy around the 14th century and spread through Europe until the 17th, was known as an age of rebirth, of learning, beauty, and reason. Yet for most women, this rebirth wasn't for them. Because while men were encouraged to study, paint, and pursue greatness, women were often told their role was to inspire greatness, not to live it. In most parts of Europe, women's lives were tightly controlled by the men around them, their fathers, brothers, and husbands. Education was rare for girls, except for those born into wealthy or noble families. And even then, their studies were usually limited to things considered feminine: music, needlework, manners, and religion. Formal schooling in philosophy, mathematics, or science was reserved for men. Women weren't allowed to attend universities. Marriage was the center of a woman's life. Most women were married off young, sometimes as early as their teens, to strengthen family alliances or improve social status. Love had little to do with it. Once married, a woman's duty was to manage the household and bear children. Legally, she belonged to her husband. If she was widowed, she might gain some independence. But even then, her property and wealth were often controlled by male relatives. But that doesn't mean women had no power. Some found ways to influence society, quietly, cleverly, and often behind the scenes. Take Isabella d'Este, one of the most powerful women of the Italian Renaissance. Born in 1474, she ruled the city-state of Mantua while her husband was away at war. She was a brilliant politician and one of the greatest art patrons of her time. Painters like Leonardo da Vinci and Titian worked for her. She was called the First Lady of the World. But even Isabella was judged not just for her intelligence, but for how well she could play the role of a perfect, virtuous woman. Another example is Catherine de' Medici, who became Queen of France in the 16th century. She used her intelligence and political skill to survive in one of the most dangerous courts in Europe. She ruled as regent for her sons and held power longer than many kings. Still, history often painted her as manipulative and ruthless, criticism rarely thrown at men who ruled the same way. And what about art, the heart of the Renaissance? Women were rarely recognized as artists. Many were forbidden from studying anatomy, sketching nude models, or joining art guilds, the very things that male artists needed to succeed. Yet some defied those limits. Sofonisba Anguissola, born in Cremona in 1532, became the first internationally recognized female painter of the Renaissance. She trained under master painters, impressed Michelangelo himself, and even became a court artist for the King of Spain. Her portraits were full of warmth, emotion, and realism, traits that stood out in a male-dominated art world. Another was Artemisia Gentileschi, a generation later. Her paintings, like Judith slaying Holofernes, showed powerful women taking control of their destiny. Her art was raw, emotional, and deeply personal. Artemisia herself had survived assault and a public trial, and she turned her pain into strength through her work. Today, she's seen as one of the first feminist icons in art history. In literature and philosophy, too, a few women broke through the barriers. Christine de Pizan, writing in the early 1400s, is often called Europe's first professional female writer. In her book, The Book of the City of Ladies, she defended women's intelligence and morality at a time when many male scholars wrote that women were inferior by nature. She dared to say that women were not the problem. The problem was how society treated them. For ordinary women, life was much harder. Peasant women worked alongside men in the fields, cared for children, and kept the home running, all with little recognition. In cities, women could become shopkeepers, midwives, or servants, but always under strict moral and social rules. And yet, through small acts of resilience, through managing households, raising educated children, preserving family legacies, women quietly held society together. Religion also played a big part in defining women's roles. The Catholic Church taught that women should be humble, modest, and obedient. But ironically, it also offered one of the few paths to education and authority, the convent. In convents, nuns could study music, medicine, and literature. Figures like Hildegard of Bingen and Teresa of Avila, though the latter was from the later Renaissance period, used their faith as a platform for intellectual and spiritual leadership, writing influential works that shaped theology for centuries. By the end of the Renaissance, things began to shift. The printing press spread new ideas faster than ever, and women began reading and writing more. Some female humanists argued that women deserved the same education as men. The seeds of change were being planted, though true equality was still far away. So, while history remembers the Renaissance as the birth of modern thought, it's important to see the full picture. It was a time when women were silenced, but also a time when some found ways to speak louder than ever. They weren't just muses or mothers or queens. They were thinkers, artists, writers, and survivors who helped shape the very world that often tried to erase them. Their story reminds us that even in the brightest ages, half of humanity can still be left in the dark, unless we choose to tell their story.